everyone. My name is Sandra Kim, IA's Professional Development Director and Strategic Programs Director. And I want to welcome you to the Manufacture Series webinars. Today's webinar, titled Tips and Techniques for Teaching Irrigation Basics to New Employees, is sponsored by Hunter Industries. Hunter Industries is a global company that provides innovative, efficient solutions for the irrigation, outdoor lighting, dispensing technology, and custom manufacturing industries. Hunter's diverse array of products are found everywhere from stadiums and national landmarks to city parks, residential properties, and commercial complexes around the world. For more information, visit their website at www.hunterindustries.com. Now, I have just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. This session will be recorded and all microphones will be muted. This webinar is worth a quarter CEU, that is 0.25 CEU. You can enter it on the Submit CEUs page under the Certification tab on the IA website at irrigation.org. If you have any questions, please type them into the question box on your screen. The presenters will answer them during the webinar. Our speakers today are Kevin Battistoni and Greg Rosink. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Kevin and Greg.
Thank you so much, Sandra. I got to say, Kevin and I are excited to be here. We're really excited to talk about the tips and tricks and techniques for bringing on new employees in an industry right now that has so much turnover and a constant need for good workers. It's really hard to find. So retaining those employees and finding good people that are ready to work is fun and challenging, but we're going to look at some of the ways that we can get through that. Kevin, are you excited about today's presentation?
Greg, can you see the enthusiasm that I'm exuding right now?
Yeah. All right, well, we'll jump right into it. I'm going to start us off with a little story from my past. When I first came into the more technical side of irrigation, I was in maintenance and stuff, water conservation, landscape maintenance, and I was starting to dive into a little bit more of the irrigation side. And I went to a landscape management company to be an irrigation tech with some experience, but it wasn't a lot of experience. And I'm sure you guys can relate, many of you. Sometimes the best way to do an onboarding process is to have them shadow somebody to understand how you do business, how you've grown in the past, and what knowledge they can bring to the table. So that was my experience. I went to the company, I did my onboarding. They said, give me all your information, your social security number. Great. Now you work for us. You're going to go shadow this individual for a couple of weeks, maybe a month. And then you'll have your truck and you can start building it out along the way. But that's how their learning process went. And don't get me wrong, I learned a lot from that experience. But where I've learned the most in my experience in the industry is diving into classes and hands-on training programs and things like that. So when I had the experience and the opportunity to do that, it helped me grow as an individual in this industry. And actually, in a recent national survey of over 400 employees spanning from baby boomers to Gen X to, like me, the millennials, 70% of the respondents indicated that job-related training and development opportunities influence their decision to stay at their job, which you would think it's the money or it's the benefits or it's the opportunities. But a lot of people say that the opportunity to grow and to learn is a reason enough to stay, because they're seeing that you want to put investment into them. So that's a great opportunity and a great segue into what Kevin's going to talk to us about for a few minutes. But we can think about all of this stuff as we're going through the presentation, as many of you might know what we're talking about. You've experienced it. You're already implementing a lot of these strategies, but we want to kind of go through them step by step in case there are people that are trying to figure all this stuff out as they go. So I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to give it over to you, Kevin. Why don't you take it away?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. And Greg's going to take you into later in the presentation into what I would say is a good outline for onboarding new employees for irrigation and the things that are tactically relevant for them to know. That the data shows from the calls that come into tech service helpline and sales managers, field service managers, what we encounter, and there's people that have dealt with in the industry for decades that there are certain, missteps that happened 20 years ago that they're openly will admit now that they've developed some bad habits as a net result. So that's more for the onboarding. I'm speaking right now more so to business owners and thinking about things from a different stance, if you will, a little bit like giving you tactically relevant information in looking at your onboarding process through the eyes of the employee and the optics of the employee you hire, which we don't often do. So Scotty Lombardi, who is our talent and acquisition manager at Hunter Industries, put together a great presentation a couple of years ago, and I swiped a few slides from him that I thought were worth sharing. So day one, right? Employees are the most impressionable during the first 60 days on the job. Now, in our industry and the seasonality where I'm at, I'm going to say probably the first 30. And every bit of information that new employee's gathered, everything they're taking in is either reinforcing the reason that they came on board or kind of buyer's remorse going, maybe this isn't the place I want to be. And I was talking to someone in a leadership position recently who told me, Kevin, every interaction that I have with anyone at work or even at home with my wife and my kids, every interaction, you're either making a deposit or a withdrawal into the equity bank of that relationship. And I think just having that fresh on the brain as a filter as a business owner when you're onboarding someone might change how you're doing things in a positive way. So Greg, if you could hit one more slide for me real quick. Right now, it's a stat, 51% of workers are looking to leave their current job. I mean, think about that. If you're a business employer and you've got 35 employees, half of them are looking to get out. Greg, go ahead, keep rifling. 75% leave their job because of their boss. I'm going to give you a quick story on me. I came from the irrigation industry working with family. In 1996, I was making $16 an hour at 19 years old. Great wage. Leadership at the company, family dynamic was I was treated not with a velvet glove, a little bit more of an acid tongue. I gladly left that job for a position making $8 an hour, pushing a broom in a warehouse where I had some of the best leadership experience over the next decade. And I was happy, literally taking a 50% pay cut. I was thrilled because it was a comfortable work environment. I look forward to going to work every day, right? Go ahead, Greg. Creating trust and transparency, right? Being available to connect with your employees through an open door policy, being approachable. It goes a long way towards winning employees and making sure that they stick around. Go ahead. Employee retention. Here's some industry stats that you may find interesting, or some of them nothing probably earth-shattering, but our industry, 67% turnover. 43% of employees name pay as their primary driver for leaving, 19% benefits, almost 30% work conditions, right? That's something we can control. Year-round employment, 34%, depending on what type of market you're in, that can play in. Go ahead, Greg. Here's an interesting one. At the Hunter Senior Business Conference 2 years ago in Barbados, we had a nice roundtable discussion where there's probably about 50 irrigation companies represented. And with the younger generation, I came up in the generation where it was do this, Kevin. And I'd say, why? And they'd say, because I blanking said so, right? It was just the old school mentality. And I like that. I like my feet to the fire. But the younger generation these days, one of the business owners got up and he said, hey, at my company, there's no job titles. We're jacks of all trades, service, installation, whatever needs to be done. But what he found is there's a lot of weight with his younger employees in that job title and what it means. And it's also a measurable thing, right? You're an assistant service technician. Now you're service technician level 1. And he said when he implemented that strategy, it changed the culture of his organization, specifically with the younger employees. And they carried themselves a little bit different. You know, the shoulders were down and back and the chest was out, and there was more pride. And so that, don't overlook these little minuscule things like titles and as a way to measure with that employee the goals in which you set out for them, and knowing when they achieve those benchmarks. And Greg, if you could go one more slide, I only have 2 left, and then you can get into the good stuff. Let's skip right over this one. I'm gonna get into the meat and potatoes here. So last week, I feel like as a sales manager, the biggest value that we bring to our partners like yourself is insight, right? I have optics into hundreds of irrigation companies, and the tips and tricks that we can learn, and also the missteps that we observe, help bring insightful information. So through the process of telling stories, that's how I like to do it. Last week, Greg and I had the opportunity to sit down with Kurt Litton from Jetstream Irrigation in Grand Blanc, Michigan. 15 total employees at Kurt's company. And I mean, if you know Kurt or you don't know Kurt, send him an email at the end of this, because he just opened up his playbook. And he was very forthcoming with an abundance of information. And he said the opening statement with onboarding new employees and training that he said to Greg and I was, the key to onboarding starts with not losing the employees I have today. And I thought that was pretty profound and impactful of a statement. And he went through some things I'll share with you that I don't want to monopolize the entire time, but I'll give you some of the wave tops to it. And it's having a plan in place. You know, he's in a seasonal market, so it's very easy to say, you know, it's just chaos around here. We can't take time to make time. And however, if you can't afford to lose the employees you have, and you want the new employees you hire to stick, then it's worth the time to pump the brakes and slot out training time. So onboarding at Jetstream in week 1, how it works with Kurt is what he will do is have every one of his employees spend a half day in the first week with the new hire. And before the new hire comes on, they were all involved in the interview process, and they are excited for the opportunity for this new individual. And so they're all willing to carve out time from their day and their normal schedule to make sure that that individual feels welcome. And they want them to be part of that culture. And it's taking time to make time and teaching well busy. And you having a good plan in play. It doesn't have to be a great plan, but he said, Kev, if you don't have some sort of architecture for the onboarding process, where it's mindful and it's been thought out through the eyes of that person you're onboarding, it's like you're setting yourself up to lose them. And he said one of the great things that helped, and if you're not doing this, you should, is having exit interviews. When you lose employees for whatever reason, you know, somebody's got another job opportunity, maybe it was just they didn't like the irrigation industry. But if we don't know, we're just guessing. So if we can have an exit interview and take that data and then apply it, you know, and then sometimes you hear some stuff you don't want to hear. I know I've certainly been there, but usually that's when the best growth comes out of it. You know, he said it's about transitioning from a job to a career. And he said, my goal every day is to make sure that my employees want to come back to work tomorrow. And what I like to call CTC, clear, timely communication of the path for that employee. And having benchmarks and measuring. So he likes to play a bit of a carrot game where there's always some reason, typically monetary, for the employee to stick around. And I'll give you an example. So in the springtime, in a seasonal market from April through July, that's when Kurt's company is the busiest. So what he instituted a few years ago is a monetary reward for perfect attendance from April 1 to July 1st. One other thing Kurt likes to put together is after 1 year of service at his organization, there is there's a monetary gain, but then also at that point in time, the Memorial Day holiday weekend, the 4th of July holiday weekend, and the Labor Day weekend are all paid. PTO days as a reward for that 1 year. And then he does 5-year acknowledgement awards, 10-year acknowledgement with monetary gain attached to all of those. And so there's always different stretch goals throughout the season, keeping his employees engaged, from profit sharing, which I thought was outstanding. Efficiencies. He encourages the employees, says, hey, here's our processes. Here's how we do things. This is not gospel. If there is a way that you can come up with where we can save additional footsteps and be more efficient at this process, yielding a higher profit margin for the company and delivering a high level of service to our customer, we want to hear it. And, you know, he recognizes there's nobody better than his actual employees who are in the trenches executing these with the procedures that and SOPs he developed, but encouraging their feedback and shaping it and then rewarding them for it. So it was really, really, I don't want to eat up all the time because Greg's got some great stuff to go through, but I did want to show or at least speak on a few of the wave tops that I thought were very relevant. And Kurt's a great guy for sharing. He said, you know, that for him, it's about recognition, culture, and teamwork, and making sure that he has buy-in and all of his employees know that he has their back and they in turn have his. And it doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't stop. It will stop happening if you stop nurturing those relationships with your employees. So just little tidbit through the optics of onboarding your employee. What's that feel like? You know, are you approachable? Are you a rough guy? You know, I tend to come in hot. Takes a certain level of self-awareness to be a little bit more present and mindful with your coworkers and people above or below you. But Greg, that's what I've got. You know, I just my little tidbit for you. But I hope there was some value in the content. And you know, I'll manage the chat box. And you know me, I'm a character, so I'll probably jump in on you a few times here and there and squirrel off.
Well, perfect. And, you know, I wanted to add to that too. Kurt was very dedicated to understanding what the employees' needs were too. And I thought that was really interesting what he said, because he kind of made each technician's truck and them their own business, in a sense that when he brings on an employee, he asks them what their goals are. Hey, is your goal to make a lot of money? Is your goal to, you know, move up in the company and be in a management role? What are your goals as you come in? And are you someone who's interested in, you know, making more money the harder you work? Or do you want to just show up to work and put in your time, do the job, and then go home? And he kind of made it so each employee has their own path, and that he caters to that and has conversations with them regularly. And I thought that was a key aspect of his conversation, was that he engages with all the employees on a regular basis to understand where they're at and where they want to go. And I know a lot of the business owners here on the call today probably say, oh, I don't have time for that. And I totally understand. Everyone is booked out until probably next June with work. And it's pretty crazy out there, but making the time to hear your employees is a good process, even if it's like comment boxes and stuff like that. So Kevin, I did want you to speak to this slide real quick as well, because you know American National better than I do. Yeah, absolutely. One of the legacy accounts, customers in the Chicagoland area, their onboarding process and their attention to continual education for all of their employees, hands-on, right? I mean, riding along in the truck with somebody is fantastic, but when you cut somebody loose and they're a greenhorn and they've got to learn in the field, that could come at the cost of some relationship equity with your customer when somebody looks like they don't know what they're doing in the field. And so what American National did was replicate every possible scenario they have in the field in the shop, so that it could be a hands-on, as we all tend to learn, right? It's a large percentage of learning, physically doing the act. And you can see there's a multitude of different products on there, some that, you know, I don't even favor, but they're there because they're out in the field, they run into them. So it's relevant to be efficient with those products. So from pumps to lighting, so on and so forth. It is a tremendous workstation. There's even backflow repair. If you have a space in your shop, I'll tell you right now, reach out to your manufacturer partners. We're all in. We're all about education at Hunter. We're the long game company. It's more than just parts.
if you reach out to your sales manager, if you need a pump start relay, controller, a couple of valves, we'll tighten you up. In the spirit of education, we're very generous. So having this in-house is killer. It helps. It takes time to build it. There's no doubt, but you got to take time to make time, especially for the onboarding.
Absolutely agree with that. And the things that I'm about to go over with you are more so just guidelines. And, a lot of you probably already know the content that I have going into this presentation, but it's really intended to give you kind of a guideline on the things that we think are the most beneficial things to teach new hires and get them started and get them ready to tackle the field and tackle those situations that are, head scratchers. So one thing I want to talk about is building an onboarding manual. You obviously have your benefits package manual and your employee manual handbook, but something that really gives a technician or an irrigator tools to be successful in the field. And there's no right or wrong way to do this. Really, what your company is focused on or what you want to be focused on is how you should build out your manual. And that's how you should build out your onboarding package for the employee is, hey, here is your little irrigation Bible to get you dialed in with some of the things that we want you to be able to reference in the field at any given moment. And this could be some of the slides that I'm showing today that you laminate and throw in the book. And if you want any of the slides that we show today, please reach out to us. One of the things that Kurt reached out to us about and what we were talking to him about was, hey, do you guys have guidelines or kind of a starter manual for someone who's new to the industry? And that was perfect timing with that question, because that's kind of what we wanted to do with this presentation and what we want to build out for the future generations of new employees. And so when you're building out your own manual, talk to other business owners. A lot of business owners are really actually pretty open to telling you some of their tips and tricks and some of the secret sauce that they spell out. And, reach out to us as the manufacturers. Kevin just nailed it on the head. We're here to support you guys with training. We have a lot of presentations. We have a lot of support documents, design guides, brochures, a lot of things that you can use in your business to help train your employees, as well as doing in-person training. So don't even hesitate to reach out to myself if you want to get in touch with a sales manager or a trainer in your area, and Kevin as well. Both Kevin and I are here to answer your call anytime. And a lot of times what we tell people is, hey, just go over to Hunter University, get started on some of the training. And I'm not going to beat down on just our training platforms and stuff. We'll get to the other stuff in a second, but I did want to let you guys know that when you visit Hunter University, there's already a kind of path to success for each area for distributors, contractors, designers, municipalities. So click the one that's right for you. And we kind of spell out some of the certificate programs that are there to support you guys and help you get started with our products, design practices, installation. And I will allude to it right now. We do have an installation series coming out for brand new people to irrigation installation, 11-part video series with a quiz and training modules to help you test your knowledge. And that'll be coming out soon. But all of this stuff is available to you for free on the website. So it's a great place to send employees that you just hired on. And then also a lot of the professional resources that we actually have on the website for you today. So if you go to the professionals tab on the Hunter Industries website, there's stuff like Hunter My List to help you build out parts lists, runtime calculators for guys that may have never made a irrigation schedule in their life. Give them this tool. They can go out and create a schedule. And I'm not trying to do a sales pitch here. I just want to give you guys an idea of how to access those tools that are already on our website to support your guys' business right now. So that's it for kind of the website side of it and the Hunter side of it. At this point, we're going to dive into those slides that I was talking about that might be supporting, a tech that you're bringing on and maybe a new hire that you're bringing in. So system troubleshooting is kind of a higher level. So I'm going to start with some high level stuff and then move down to some of the basics. But I think that this is important to talk about first. Well, we're just getting into the presentation here. System troubleshooting is probably the hardest to teach, but once you get your employees the right tools, the right techniques, and they understand how to use these great tools that you've given them, they're going to be a lot more successful in the field. a lot less time spent on site, and it can really shave down time on site and efficiency. So obviously, if you go out to a site and you see something like this, it's not a whole lot of troubleshooting other than everything's broken, you know. So what we'll dive into first here, though, is basic electrical troubleshooting skills. So the three fundamentals of troubleshooting on a site are most often, does the controller work? Is the wiring good? Is the solenoid working? Or are there any hydraulic issues with the valve? Those are kind of the three components: the valve, the wire, and the controller when you get on site. Sometimes if nothing's working and everything looks okay on the electrical and hydraulic side, sometimes the water's just off. But what we want to do here is kind of give you some of the tools and methods of teaching those topics about the tools to your employees. So, hey, this is a $7 product right here that's going to save you a lot of heartache. If you don't have one of these, or if it's not something that you're already giving technicians as they come in, this is a great tool to make sure that the power source that you're plugging a controller into from the very beginning is a viable source. If you get a bad reading on here, it takes 30 seconds to plug this in and know if you have a good outlet or a bad outlet, but it's going to save you a call in the future if it is a bad outlet and all of a sudden your controller starts doing wacky things. We've seen it before. It's kind of a double check on you. Kevin, do you have something to add to this?
Yeah, no doubt, right? I mean, look, the second you plug your controller as an irrigation professional into the wall, you accept ownership for it functioning properly, okay? So prior to that, or if you're out in the troubleshooting process, $7 at Harbor Freight, you know if your outlet's grounded, you know if the neutral and the hot are in the right position. Any irrigation controller that's not properly grounded, or the neutral and the hot are not in the right location, is going to do abnormal things at some point, right? And by simply plugging this in, you can address it on the front end, and now the ownership of that is off of your shoulders, right? If we don't know, we're just guessing. It's a 3-second test with a $7 piece of equipment that gives us a very important data point. You know, we always want to start at the source and work our way out. And Greg, going through this, he's just given you all these slides will be made available, tactically relevant, onboarding stuff. A voltmeter is an intimidating piece of equipment. Greg's going to show you exactly what to show somebody who's new and what's relevant and why, you know, off of data taken in from, you wouldn't believe how many guys call tech service, right, Greg? And okay, I got my solenoid. Okay, put the ohm setting on. You got the continuity check on that solenoid. You know, there's very, and it, a high percentage, like 50% of the people that call into tech service for electrical troubleshooting don't have a voltmeter. $20, you know, between this and the voltmeter, you know, we're starting in the right pace. But sorry, I didn't mean to squirrel you.
No, you're great. And that kind of brings us to the next topic, is the right tools for the right job, right? So you can give somebody a multimeter, but if we don't teach them how to use it, then we're just giving them, you know, a big expensive paperweight, right? It's going to bounce around the back of the truck, get torn up. We don't want to do that. Now, I say expensive, but you can get multimeters at Harbor Freight for $10. I mean, you can invest in a higher end one, or you can go over to Harbor Freight and get your local multimeter. But honestly, the tool that's in front of them is going to save them so much time on site. If they understand how to use it properly, they can know exactly what's going on the property with either the wiring, the solenoid, or the controller within about the first 10 minutes of getting onto site without even pulling a shovel out of the truck. So it's kind of important to take the time to show them these settings on the multimeter, because this one, pretty straightforward, has very few settings, but there's some of them where it's got 97 different dial settings, and it can be overwhelming to understand what each setting does. So I think in irrigation, the most fundamental ones to teach is AC voltage, DC voltage, ohms, and continuity. Now, I like to relate electricity to water because a lot of people understand water with, you know, pressure, PSI, flow, gallons per minute, and friction loss in the pipes. So I like to say, hey, voltage is like PSI. It's the pressure. It's the amount of electrical pressure that's being pushed down the line. Then right there, you move on to amperage, and that's like gallons per minute. So you have your pressure that's pushing the volume down, but the amperage is actually the volume of electricity that's moving down the path. So if we start to relate some of these electrical topics that might be scary and not so relevant in your day-to-day with irrigation topics or with water topics that are very, frequently discussed. It makes it easier for them to understand what they're looking at. And then ohms is like friction loss. So it's the amount of resistance that's created. A smaller wire at a longer distance is going to have more resistance than a large wire at a short distance. It's basic. So if we help them understand what these terms are and how to use the tools that are in front of them, they can be extremely successful on site. That takes me on to, okay, there are more expensive and less expensive meters. They can all do about the same thing. You just have to teach them, if you buy them a different meter than what you were teaching with in the shop, that the settings are a little bit different on each one, but the logic is the same. So, in the meter on the left, it's just voltage AC to the 200 or less. Controllers operate at a range, or are supposed to operate at 120 volts, but they have a range of plus or minus 10% of that. So anywhere between 108 and 132 volts AC is going to be efficient and sufficient for the controller to operate. So we go to our 200 setting or less. Now, if you look at the meter on the right, that can be a little bit foreign because now you have to turn one dial to 200 and make sure that the slider is on voltage AC, and it gets a little more confusing. But if they know the basic fundamentals, they're going to be successful. And that takes us to kind of understanding the voltage side of the system. And again, I'm going to go through these pretty quickly because, many of you know these fundamentals already, but we just want to give you the support material to teach the employees that are coming in the tips and tricks. So again, when we test at the outlet, like we saw in the last scene, we want to see that 120 volt range, right? If we know we have that power or we have that voltage at the outlet, now we move on to the controller and the transformer. So the transformer is going to step that down, and the actual output of the transformer is going to vary based on the input. So if it's 120 volts input, you're going to have 24 volts exactly output. A lot of times that varies a bit, but it's a 10-to-1 input or a 10-to-1 transfer rate. So we can go straight to where the transformer comes out and see that we have power there. These are all kind of the processes of elimination if they come up to a site where the controller might be off or there's nothing on the screen. And once we verified that we have power to the power module on the controller from the transformer, then we can start turning stations on to see if we're getting power from the power module to the station output. So to understand whether or not the station outputs are working, if valve 6 doesn't seem to be operating, they can go and immediately turn on valve 6, put their leads on valve 6 and see if there's electricity going out to the field. If they're getting 26 volts like you're seeing here on this multimeter, then we know that the power is going out there, but there's probably an issue with the wiring or the solenoid. So getting through the process of understanding, is this going to be a controller issue, a wire issue, or a solenoid valve issue, is really the building blocks to understanding the troubleshooting process. So that's why we want to teach this kind of stuff. Where we know now that we have power and everything from the controller, we can easily identify if the solenoid is good in the field. And that's where we go to our ohm settings. So this is another really important setting on the multimeter to teach them. And if we're in that 20 to 60 ohm range, we're in the sweet spot. So you turn it to that omega sign, and then you can test at the solenoid, or you can even test at the terminal. But I always say, make sure that the terminal power is off to the controller when you're checking ohms. Otherwise, you can get crazy resistance readings. So if you've done it before, you know that. If you haven't, this might be new to you. But it's important to shut the controller off anytime we're doing an ohms or resistance reading.
If the clock's on, will it make your hair stand up too, or?
Only if you put your tongue on the terminal.
Roger that.
So understanding that we can do it from the solenoid is important, and then understanding that we can do it from the controller is important as well. So we want to make sure that that controller is in the off position and test each terminal. This process takes about 3 minutes, depending on the size station count you have on your controller. And you understand now that you have power to the controller and that your solenoid resistance is what you should be seeing. If it's not on one of the stations, then you can start looking at, is it a bad solenoid or is it bad wiring? And that can be a little bit more tricky, but within 3 minutes, you know if any one of those stations is good, if it's got a good ohms or resistance reading from the controller or to the solenoid on the valve, and that your controller is operational. So here's a little cheat sheet on kind of what those resistance readings should be and what you should be looking for. So anything within that 0 to 20 ohms reading, it's probably going to be a bad solenoid, and it's going to need to be replaced. A dead short, that could very well be, you know, the station wires, the common and the station wire touching somewhere in the field on the way to the solenoid. But most often, if you do get one of these 0 to 6 ohms readings or 0 to 20 on a station, that we can then go to the control or out to the valve itself and test the solenoid straight from the valve. If it's good, but we were getting a bad reading from the controller, now you're looking at a wire issue. And we did all of this within the first 10 minutes of being on the site. So understand how to use the tools is almost more important than understanding how to fix the problem. If you can identify the problem, you can learn how to fix it pretty easy. And then if it's over 60, it's probably an open. So you can start looking for maybe a cut in the wire or a bad wire connection. Do you have anything to add on the multimeter basics there?
No, I like the flow of it. I mean, you're given tactically relevant information. I feel like as long as we make this available in a PDF format and gets pushed out to all attendees, that it could easily be printed and or laminated, you know what I mean? And just the pecking order in the spirit of working efficiently. You know,
and that's the whole intention with this presentation, is that we can give you guys some materials that you can incorporate into your onboarding process and your manual that you're going to create. So that takes us to, okay, now we know the electrical side of it. Now we know that the solenoid's good, the controller is good, but if the valve still doesn't activate, we might have another problem that's mechanical. And we'll talk about the electrical side of it too, but we might have a situation where a station was running throughout the night and a resident or a bystander came by and said, hey, that zone's been running the whole time I've been walking my dog. I don't think it's supposed to, and water's running down the street. So they may have gone over, opened the valve box, if they know anything about irrigation, and turn the flow control down on the valve. Now, maybe you still have good reading at the solenoid and you're getting electricity to it and you're hearing it pop, but nothing's activating. So that's one of the things that you can look at. Flow control. Another one is, hey, the solenoid doesn't activate. Maybe somebody has over tightened that solenoid so that the plunger, when it's activated, isn't pulling up far enough to actuate the valve. So sometimes over tightening or cross threading even a solenoid into the solenoid port could be an issue in itself. So again, this is something that we want to teach when we're installing slip glue valves. So if it's a slip type valve and not a threaded one, we want to really make sure that we teach good gluing habits on that, because if we put too much glue in, oftentimes it can clog up the exhaust port on the valve. And so it's a brand new valve, a brand new installation, but the valve won't activate. Well, we see this a lot, and you know, this isn't a function of the valve not working or the system not being installed properly. It was just an accident in the gluing process. So these are types of things that we don't think about on the day-to-day when we're installing, but it's something to keep in the back of your mind and teach those proper habits of gluing and stuff like that.
Even if it's threaded, Greg, you know, you get a little Hercules mode on the Teflon paste, and next thing you know.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, you've probably seen that a handful of times. Another thing, debris in the solenoid entry port. So something might have gotten past the filter, or there is the chance that, hey, I took the solenoid off to test it to see if it was good, and some debris fell in there, and I put the solenoid back in, and now the port's clogged up. So water can't exit the upper chamber of the diaphragm, allowing the valve to open. So if we teach these little tips and tricks, they're going to be prepared to troubleshoot this in the field so that they don't immediately go, oh, valve's bad, we got to cut it out. There are things that we can do to service a valve before it needs to be cut out. And I think that's a good practice to get into as well, as, hey, can we troubleshoot this valve and avoid having to cut it out of the ground, dig out the valve box, put in a new valve, and spend all day on a property? Is this something that could be serviced or replaced? Because most of the time the body is fine, right, Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, look, that's the most labor intensive component. So we want to exhaust every avenue. Look, I mean, it just is a general rule for me about trying to be efficient in the field. If I'm going in, that's the last, hopefully I can fix it from the controller. Perhaps I can't, and it's hydraulic and it's related to the valve itself. That said, the labor that it takes to get inside of a valve and remove all the screws, at that point, my stance is every replaceable component in that valve, short of taking my manifold apart in the body, I'm going to replace for good measure. Because if a solenoid's worn out, or then likely the diaphragm, it will be next, right? Or something with the bonnet. So, or if there's a clog in the exhaust port there, it just makes good sense, right? Why just replace one component when you open up that valve, when we're not talking about big dollars, but we are talking about lots of labor.
Absolutely. And you know what? Sometimes when we're talking about identification of these issues, it doesn't just have to be our irrigators and our technicians. This can be teaching these habits to even just the landscape maintenance guys, the guys that are there doing maintenance on all the landscape, cutting the lawn, trimming the shrubs. If they know these techniques too, if they know to look for these things, then they can probably solve a problem without having a technician go out, or they can understand what to tell the technician with better confidence and better background knowledge. So things like the valve not closing. Sometimes somebody came by and thought, hey, that zone needs a little bit more water, and they opened the manual bleed valve on the top, or did the quarter turn on the solenoid to manually activate it. It could be as simple as, oh, somebody wanted more water? I just got to go turn that off. Now your maintenance guy was mowing the lawn, saw that station on, goes over, turns it off. Hey, we're good to go. Test it from the controller. Hey, it still works. Now we just saved ourselves the time of sending a technician out to the job site to figure out why this zone is still running. Another thing is debris in the metering port. This is a little bit more in depth, where you wouldn't know that this was happening unless they took the valve apart. So this would probably be a technician or irrigator level, where we're going to actually have to take the valve apart to identify the things that are going on inside of it. So there are some things that are easily identifiable, and there's things that you wouldn't know unless you do a little bit more in-depth maintenance on that valve. So another thing to look for is weeping or leaking valves. A lot of times I see this when I'm walking down the street. I look down at a head on the ground and it's covered in moss and there's a little pool of water around it. It's not a huge leak and it's not a huge issue, but what's happening is water is getting past that diaphragm seat and getting to the downport side of the valve and leaking out all day, every day. And a small leak like that can definitely add up over time. So understanding for the guys to look out for those types of things, like a low head drainage that seems to be going on a lot, moss on a head, water in a valve box, or excessive water around a valve box. These are all things to be looking for that could identify that a valve needs servicing. So a tear or rip in the diaphragm, this could lead to water continuing down the outside or the downstream side of the valve and creating that issue and creating that water or that buildup of moss. Another one might be debris in the solenoid seat where, hey, I did maintenance, I took it apart and a little bit of debris got back in there, but I didn't see it. And I put the solenoid back in. And now after one actuation of on and off with the technician being there, now that piece of debris pops into the port and the solenoid can't close down and seal. Now water is going to continue to run through that zone. And sometimes it's going to be the valve's completely on and the irrigation's running full blast. And sometimes it's just a slow leak on the downstream side of the valve.
I think it's a good visual representation, Greg. You know what I mean? It amazes me sometimes when you show the hydraulics of a valve and how it functions. There's a lot of guys who've been in the field for many, many years and never understood. They knew it worked when the solenoid went on, right? And they know the process of elimination of changing parts. But I think from the jump in the spirit of onboarding, again, this will serve as a good reference point for new people, so you're not flying completely blind.
Definitely.
Good info.
Well, you know, and another one for these, the valve not opening or not activating, is if you do have debris in this outport side, in this exhaust port, you can still activate it manually by opening the bleed valve and releasing the pressure and water that's in this upper chamber of the diaphragm that's creating that downward motion on that diaphragm to keep the valve shut, by releasing it out the bleed port rather than the exhaust port. So there might be debris in there, and the guy goes up and he goes, "Oh man, it's crazy. I opened the bleed screw and it's, you know, it runs just fine. But if I try and turn it on from the controller, it doesn't. But my ohms reading looks great." So these are all things that, you know, if we can kind of teach ahead of time or give them something to hold on to and reference in the field. Hey, my valve's not operating. Oh, valve not operating on the index. Go to that page. Oh, here's some of the issues that might be causing that, and give them a system of elimination. And if it just doesn't, if they just can't fix it with the information that we've given them in the book, well, this is a little bit more difficult project and we need to do a little bit more investigation. But there's a lot of stuff that we can see. And Kevin alluded to this earlier. You gorilla grip that fitting that's going into the valve and you over tighten it. And a lot of times we see cracked bodies on valves because of that over tightening or over application of Teflon tape. And it happens with Teflon paste too. It actually adds,
Greg, 3 revolutions.
3 revolutions.
Three
Okay,
revolutions.
yeah. So 3 revolutions of the Teflon tape around the fitting. 1, 2, 3.
And
Should
don't
be all
go,
you need.
you got it. And don't go berserker mode when you're tightening it, and otherwise you're gonna crack that bad boy.
So that's another good method to teach too. But when you're using Teflon paste, it can become a lubricant, and it becomes super easy to over tighten that fitting into the socket of the valve, creating that crack. And if it's not cracked the moment that you install it, sometimes with the heating and cooling of the, you know, nature's elements, it can then stress fracture after the fact because it was just at the breaking point and a little bit of cooling and heating sent it over the edge. So that kind of covers our valve troubleshooting and the methods that we want to teach, and identification of issues in the field so that we understand when we're looking at an issue or when we're looking at a zone running, what's actually happening. And then that takes us to wiring. So some of the things that we want to teach in the field to look for when dealing with wiring is corrosion. In this case, we had some severe corrosion on the wiring, which actually made the wire nut eventually just fall off. And this is a non-waterproof wire nut. So what happens is over time, whether it be corrosive soil, whether it be water intrusion, or any other elements in the air, maybe salty air, that corrosion is going to build up and make that station or that zone fail. Again, here we have non-waterproof connectors where, hey, you can see here that this individual was, let me go back to that. This individual was trying, they had waterproof wire connectors in the system, but they were trying to troubleshoot the system. So they cut into the insulation coating on the wire to test it out. They forgot to put the waterproof wire nut back on. We'll say forgot. But
I hate it when that happens.
These are like the wiring issues that we want to avoid. So this is a perfect example of, well, it doesn't look terrible, but if we break it down a little bit, we have non-waterproof wire nut here with a pretty significant joint of wiring. So this could be your common. And if a connection like this goes out on your common, you lose a lot of stations. If it happens on the station side or the station terminal wire, then it's not as big of an issue because you're down one station. But if it's the common wire and a junction like this that goes bad, now you're out about, you know, could be half your system, could be your whole system, depending on where that happens. Those are important things to identify or to teach is, hey, when I show up on site, is one station not working? Are all stations not working? Is half the system working? Those are all things to be looking for and teaching so that when you identify, okay, it's maybe a station wire that's bad, or maybe it's a common wire, a common connection that's gone bad, and now my whole system's out or half my system's out. Those are kind of the things that we want to look at. And we have a waterproof connection here, and then we have this connection that has some sort of maybe blue glue or some sort of glue that's put into the connector to make it waterproof. Just spend the money and buy the waterproof wire nuts and teach the guys how to use it. and understand how that manufacturer wants you to install those waterproof connections. Here's another example where this is a 2-wire system, and we don't have wire connectors. We have some waterproof connectors. We have non-waterproof connectors, and this system failed like it should. If you don't have those connectors and you don't have wiring done well and with, time and patience in mind when you're doing it, that system will fail. And if you are the installer, could be an issue for you later on. Another one where this one I like to point out because we have no connection right here, right? It's completely open. It doesn't have the copper crimp that normally goes with these DS 400 connectors, and it doesn't have the waterproof cap. This whole area, non-waterproof caps. This is the area that I like to point out because it may have the waterproofing connector, it may have the copper crimp done well, and it may have the waterproof cap on the top. But what you see here is a little bit of copper wire sticking out. Now your waterproof connection is useless because this is going to be your fail point right here. So making sure that you cut the wires at an even length and all of them go into the connector at an even point, and everything is surrounded in that waterproofing gel, whether it be waterproof caps or a wire connector with a gel-filled tube that goes on top of it. Another one where shovel damage hit a 2-wire system and actually was creating a short because there was arcing between this wire and this wire. So the whole system was not working because of a short. So the energy going down would arc between these two and cause a short. If you just fix this, it'd be fine. We could teach that and we'd be probably good for a while, but we want to actually, when we're fixing something, take a look at what else might have been broken or might have been damaged in that process. And you'll see right here that there is a slight nick in the wire. That's a perfect opportunity for water intrusion and corrosion. So maybe we fixed this, but we didn't see that, and we didn't teach to see this or look for this kind of stuff. And that becomes an issue later on. When you go, well, I fixed that right there, and it was a good connection, that would be your issue point right there.
Yeah,
and then identify
that on a conventional system for a while, but once you go 2-wire, it's like hyper accelerant, right? The integrity of that jacket is mission critical to operation.
Yeah, exactly. And then, identifying, hey, you can't avoid having water in your valve boxes sometimes, depending on where you live. There's just groundwater that's always intruding into these things, into the valve boxes. But take a look at it, pop the lids open every once in a while. You may be able to identify some of the issues with your system kind of fluctuating on and off. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And that could be water intrusion in the presence of water creating a short or an issue. And then when the valve box is dry, it works just fine. Those are things that might come up in the field, and you might want to teach the guys that, and get in the habit of putting the wire nuts with the opening to the waterproof connector facing down if you do deal with water intrusion in valve boxes, because that'll help to drain any moisture that does get in the connection out of the connection when it dries out a bit. So again, using the waterproof connections is great, but sometimes there's techniques to teach when installing the connections and leaving them in the box that might help prevent any water intrusion in the future. So that's what I have for you for wiring and electrical troubleshooting and mechanical valve troubleshooting. And now we're going to get kind of into some of the more basic topics, and I'm going to fly through these because many of you are probably familiar with these, and the slides pretty much,
Greg,
teach the content. Go ahead.
I know you are going to fly through them, and I know they're low level, and probably the vast majority of the audience isn't hanging on the edge of their chair. I'm just going to circle back on something that you spoke on, and it came up in conversation with Kurt. And when we said, what can we do better for you to put tools in your hands to educate new employees? Sure. And his very first statement was, you guys are killing it with the online training. And I know you spoke of it. It's a tremendous curriculum. I see it's free. And I think that's the only problem with it. We devalue things that don't have a high price attached to it. Don't devalue the online training content that we put together. Multiple languages. Like I said, you onboard somebody, you don't have to eat the elephant all at once. You can salami slice it and literally take a greenhorn and have them understand hydraulics, head spacing, layout, full residential installation of not just irrigation, but of landscape lighting. And now as technology enters our industry, also with the connected device arena, where we most often stumble and look like we don't know what we're doing in the field. To take the time to put some sort of initiative together for existing employees that you want to up their game and grow within your organization, but specifically for onboarding new ones. I mean, that do not overlook our online training curriculum. I mean, we're more than just parts at this organization, and what we put into long game play with you as our partners, it's worthwhile. And I promise you it'll pay dividends. And if you think it sucks, tell us and we'll make it better.
Absolutely agree with you. All right. So just to dive into a little bit, we have some basic guidelines when we're doing any installation or maintenance of our rotors, our sprays, our MPs, any type of drip system that we're installing. And I just wanted to give you guys some clips here that can help you teach basic practices of something as simple as a nozzle installation. Re-nozzling is a good thing and can be really beneficial for the efficiency of the system, but understanding how to get that nozzle out and putting it in and effectively doing it so that it runs efficiently is one of the things that gets overlooked the most, I think. So teaching these basic topics is really important. Choosing the nozzle that's correct for the system. If you have rotors mixed with quarters, halves, and fulls on the same system, if you put the same nozzle into all of those rotors, you're going to have inefficiencies in your system and you're going to have brown spots. So understanding the way that we should select our nozzles for layouts where we do have quarters, halves, and fulls mixed on the same zone is really important, because you always have to irrigate to the worst case head, right? So the area that's the driest is what you have to irrigate to so that the customer loves and sees that nice green, lush landscape. So making sure that we have even distribution, head-to-head coverage, all those things are really important. But sometimes it comes down to something as simple as nozzling, and not over nozzling and not under nozzling. You know, and the distances these nozzles throw is important to know as well, and the pressure related to them. Understanding the right way to install it, making sure things are installed vertically and not tilted. Understanding the adjustments of right stops and left stops, and making sure that, you know, you don't have overspray onto hardscapes that creates inefficiencies in the system. We'll do the same thing with sprays and MP rotators. You know, understanding the basic fundamentals of adjustment is, when I look at the video site that we have, our YouTube channel, one of the most watched videos on our channel is how to adjust a Hunter rotor. And I don't think it's because it's too difficult. It's just that a lot of people haven't done it before. Might be homeowners, might be people that are new to irrigation, but it's fundamental. And once they know, they'll always remember. So,
you know, it's very real simple. All Hunter rotors, right? We have a right set edge because everybody else is wrong.
Well, that's only true until you get to the MP rotator. Then we have a left set.
I said rotor though.
That's true. That's true. You did say rotor. I'll give you that one. But yeah, so the MP rotator, it's going to be a similar adjustment to the spray nozzle, but we're going to adjust from the left side. So those are little tips and tricks that the guys going into the field should understand, so that they really can do a good job from the very beginning and not be scratching their head like, oh crap, I don't want to ask my boss how to adjust a rotor because I should know how to do this, right? We want to give them the tools so that they don't have to ask questions. And this spray stand, this is a great tool to help teach adjustment. It's really inexpensive to build. It's something that you can build yourself. So it's a nice build your own training tool, or BYOTT. And you can teach both adjustment. You can teach the concept of pressure and its relation to flow. And in this case, we have a unpressure regulated head versus a pressure regulated head with a flow meter on here that shows the flow as both of them are going. So you can help your new employees understand how flow and pressure directly correlate in the system. And then you can show them with a rotor how to adjust that as well. So this is a great tool, and I wish we could show you how to use it in the field. We'll have a video that we can send out after that you guys can watch to understand this tool better and how to build it. But that's all we have for you today. Kevin, was there something else or anything else you wanted to address before we sign off?
Yeah, as usual, your hair looks perfect. I mean, that's
so does yours.
Thank you. Hair number 152 is a little out of place, but no, I think it was. I mean, the goal, and we want feedback because we want to get better. But the goal is to give you some tactically relevant information to apply for the onboarding process, and we hope you found the business ownership portion about engagement of value as well. And if anybody wants to get in contact with Kurt, we're happy to facilitate that. You know, we love peer-to-peer, contractor to contractor, whenever we can be the conduit to that for contractors to share relevant information in a non-competitive environment that helps up the game of the entire industry. That's what we want. We want everybody here to be successful and profitable. Otherwise, we're doing a poor job being your partner.
Couldn't have said it better myself, Kevin. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone, for attending. And don't forget to check our website for upcoming webinars during the year. I want to thank Kevin and Greg for sharing their knowledge with us today, and to Hunter for sponsoring the webinar. If you had a question that we did not answer, feel free to email Greg and Kevin directly. Their email addresses are up on the screen, or you could email it also to education@irrigation.org, and we will pass your question on to the appropriate person.
So one thing that's come up in the chats, and it's been requested by a multitude of people, is they would like a copy of the PowerPoint in a PDF file. Greg, is that something we can facilitate and send out to the entire list of attendees?
Yes, it is. And there's actually a few more slides that I wanted to add to it that would be helpful for teaching irrigation practices as well. So I'll add those in, and then I will put together the PDF for you.
You're going slide heavy. I like it. Okay,
hey,
very good.
A picture says 1,000 words, Kevin.
Yeah, that sure does. That's why I have a face for radio.
Thank you so much, Sandra.
Okay, thank you
Really
again.
appreciate it. Yeah, everyone have a great day, and stay safe out there.
Yes, please. Okay, this concludes our webinar. Thank you so much.